A man rescued an abandoned puppy. Years later, he finds it on the street. But the animal's reaction made him tremble. The rain pounded mercilessly against Marcus Reed's windshield as he drove home along the deserted country road. The late October storm had arrived without warning, transforming his usual 30-minute commute into a treacherous journey through sheets of water and howling wind. Lightning flashed across the sky, briefly illuminating the dense forest that lined both sides of the narrow road. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter, leaning forward as he strained to see through the downpour. At 32, he had recently moved to this rural community after accepting a position as the new high school science teacher. The small town of Millfield was a far cry from the busy streets of Chicago, where he had spent most of his adult life. But after everything that had happened, the change was exactly what he needed. Another flash of lightning lit up the roadside, and Marcus instinctively tapped the brakes. Something had caught his eye, a small moving shape just off the shoulder of the road. He slowed the car, squinting through the rain-streaked window. There it was again, a tiny, sodden form struggling to move in the ditch. "What the hell?" Marcus muttered to himself, pulling over and putting on his hazard lights. Common sense told him to keep driving. The storm was intensifying, and he was still a good 10 miles from home. But something about that small, struggling shape tugged at him. Grabbing his flashlight from the glove compartment, Marcus stepped out into the deluge. The rain immediately soaked through his light jacket, and the wind nearly knocked him sideways. Shielding the flashlight with his body, he made his way toward the ditch. The beam of light revealed what appeared to be a small puppy, no more than a few months old, its golden fur plastered against its tiny frame. The animal was shivering violently, making weak attempts to climb up the muddy slope. "Hey there, little one," Marcus called softly, carefully making his way down the slippery incline. The puppy flinched at his approach, but was too exhausted to flee. As Marcus drew closer, he could see that the animal's left hind leg was bloodied, and it was whimpering in pain. Without hesitation, Marcus shrugged off his jacket and gently wrapped it around the trembling puppy. "It's okay. I've got you now," he whispered, cradling the small bundle against his chest. The puppy offered no resistance, its eyes glazed with exhaustion and fear. Back in the car, Marcus cranked up the heat and placed the wrapped puppy on the passenger seat. Under the dome light, he could see just how pitiful the creature looked, ribs visible beneath its matted fur, ears drooping, eyes clouded with pain. There was no collar, and given their remote location, Marcus suspected the puppy had either been abandoned or had wandered away from a distant farm. "Hang in there, buddy," he said, pulling back onto the road. "We're going to get you some help." The nearest veterinary clinic was in the town of Lakeside, 15 miles in the opposite direction from his home. Marcus glanced at the dashboard clock, 9:17 p.m., and wondered if the clinic would even be open. But a quick check on his phone revealed an emergency veterinary service that operated until midnight. As he drove, Marcus kept glancing at the small bundle beside him. The puppy had stopped shivering quite so violently, but its breathing was shallow, and it hadn't moved since he'd placed it on the seat. "Stay with me," Marcus murmured, reaching over to gently stroke the puppy's head. To his surprise, the tiny animal responded with the faintest thump of its tail. The lights of Lakeside Veterinary Emergency Services gleamed through the rain like a beacon. Marcus parked as close to the entrance as possible, tucked the puppy securely against his chest, and made a dash for the door. The receptionist looked up in surprise as Marcus burst in, dripping water all over the linoleum floor. "I found him on the side of the road," he explained breathlessly. "He's hurt, and I think he might be starving." Dr. Sarah Chen, a veterinarian in her early 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, quickly ushered them into an examination room. "You did the right thing bringing him in," she said, gently unwrapping the puppy from Marcus's sodden jacket. He's in pretty bad shape." Under the bright lights of the exam room, the puppy looked even worse. His golden fur was caked with mud, and the injury to his leg was clearly visible, a deep gash that Dr. Chen suspected had been caused by a coyote or perhaps barbed wire. "Will he make it?" Marcus asked, watching as the vet checked the puppy's vitals and hooked up an IV for fluids. "He's dehydrated and malnourished, and that leg needs immediate attention," Dr. Chen replied, her expression grave but determined. "But he's young and he's a fighter. I can tell that much already. Are you planning to keep him?" The question caught Marcus off guard. He hadn't thought beyond getting the puppy to safety. His small rented house didn't allow pets, and with his demanding schedule at the new school, he barely had time to take care of himself. I don't know if I can," he admitted reluctantly. Dr. Chen nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Well, we'll focus on getting him stable first. Then we can figure out next steps. We work with a couple of good rescue organizations." For the next hour, Marcus sat in the waiting room, his clothes slowly drying in the heated air. He scrolled through his phone, catching up on work emails, but his thoughts kept returning to the small, vulnerable creature fighting for its life just a few rooms away. It was nearly midnight when Dr. Chen finally emerged, pulling off her latex gloves. "He's stabilized," she reported with a small smile. "The leg wound has been cleaned and stitched, and we've started him on antibiotics. He's severely undernourished, but there don't appear to be any underlying health issues. With proper care, he should make a full recovery." Relief washed over Marcus. "That's great news," he said, surprised by the intensity of his own reaction. "He'll need to stay here for at least a few days," Dr. Chen continued. "Once he's stronger, we can contact the rescue." "I'll take him," Marcus interrupted, the words tumbling out before he could analyze them. "I mean, if that's okay. I'll need to talk to my landlord, but I'd like to give him a home." Dr. Chen's expression softened. "That's wonderful. He seems like a special little guy. Golden retrievers are incredible companions, and this one has obviously got a strong will to live." Marcus filled out the necessary paperwork, provided his contact information, and paid for the emergency services, a sum that made his eyes widen slightly, but which he handed over without complaint. Before leaving, he asked to see the puppy one more time. In a small recovery kennel, wrapped in warm blankets and connected to an IV, the golden puppy slept peacefully. His fur had been cleaned, revealing a beautiful honey gold color that glowed under the soft lights. Marcus gently stroked the puppy's head, and even in sleep, the tiny tail gave a faint wag. "I'll be back for you," Marcus promised softly. "Just keep fighting." As he drove home through the gradually subsiding storm, Marcus couldn't explain the strange connection he felt to the abandoned puppy. Perhaps it was simply the universal human instinct to protect the vulnerable. Or perhaps, after everything he'd lost in Chicago, the universe was offering him a chance to save something, someone who needed him. Either way, as Marcus finally arrived home and collapsed into bed, his last thoughts were of golden fur and that tiny, resolute tail thump that had somehow reached into his chest and wrapped around his heart. The next morning, Marcus woke to sunlight streaming through his bedroom window, a stark contrast to the previous night's tempest. For a moment, he lay still, wondering if the rain-soaked rescue had been a dream. But the mud-stained clothes draped over his bathroom door confirmed reality. He reached for his phone and saw a text message from Dr. Chen. "Puppy had a good night, eating a little this morning. You can visit any time today." Relief flooded through him as he replied that he'd come by after school. First, though, he needed to have a difficult conversation with his landlord, Gerald Finch, a retired postal worker known throughout Millfield for his rigid adherence to rules. Marcus found Mr. Finch in his usual spot, tending to the immaculate garden that surrounded the main house. The old man looked up from his roses as Marcus approached, his weathered face creasing into a polite but reserved smile. "Mr. Finch, I need to talk to you about something important," Marcus began, his hands stuffed nervously in his pockets. 20 minutes later, Marcus walked back to his cottage, a mixture of disbelief and elation making his step lighter than it had been in months. Not only had Mr. Finch agreed to waive the no-pets clause in his lease, but he'd also offered to help build a small fence for the backyard. "Golden retrievers need space to run," the old man had declared, revealing that he'd grown up with the breed on his family's farm. The school day dragged interminably. Marcus found himself checking the clock every few minutes during his lectures, earning curious glances from his students. When the final bell rang at 3:15, he was out the door almost as quickly as the teenagers. Lakeside Veterinary Emergency Services looked completely different in daylight, a cheerful modern building with bright blue trim and a neatly landscaped entrance. The same receptionist from the night before greeted him with a knowing smile. "Dr. Chen said you'd be by. She's with a patient, but you can go see your puppy. Second door on the left, Recovery Room B." The recovery room was quiet, with soft lighting and a row of kennels along one wall. Most were empty, but in the third kennel from the door, a small golden head popped up at Marcus's approach. The puppy's ears perked forward, and his tail began to wag enthusiastically. "Hey there, buddy," Marcus said softly, kneeling in front of the kennel. The puppy pressed his nose through the grate, sniffing excitedly. His eyes, which had been dull with pain the night before, now shone with warmth and recognition. Dr. Chen entered the room, clipboard in hand. "He remembers you," she observed with a smile. "That's a good sign." "How is he doing?" Marcus asked, unable to tear his gaze from the puppy, who was now attempting to paw at the kennel door. "Remarkably well," Dr. Chen replied, opening the kennel. The puppy immediately scrambled forward, nearly tumbling in his eagerness to reach Marcus. His blood work came back much better than expected. No heartworm, no serious underlying conditions. He's about 4 months old, and despite the malnourishment, his bone structure is excellent. He's going to be a beautiful dog. Marcus gathered the wriggling puppy into his arms, laughing as a warm tongue enthusiastically licked his chin. The IV had been removed, and although the injured leg was still bandaged, the puppy seemed to bear weight on it with only a slight wince. "When can I take him home?" Marcus asked, settling on the floor with the puppy in his lap. "I'd like to keep him another day for observation, but if all goes well, you can pick him up tomorrow afternoon." Dr. Chen handed Marcus a folder. "Here's information on puppy care, recommended foods, vaccination schedules, and a prescription for antibiotics. Have you thought of a name yet?" Marcus looked down at the puppy, who was contentedly chewing on the drawstring of his hoodie. The golden fur gleamed under the lights, and those intelligent brown eyes gazed up at him with complete trust. "Chance," Marcus decided. "His name is Chance." For the next hour, Marcus sat on the floor of the recovery room, playing gently with Chance and getting to know his new companion. Despite his ordeal, the puppy was remarkably resilient, eagerly engaging with toys that Dr. Chen provided and responding to Marcus's voice with rapt attention. "He's going to need some training and socialization," Dr. Chen advised as Marcus reluctantly prepared to leave, "and that leg will require some follow-up care, but you've got a special one here." The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Marcus left school immediately after his last class and raced to the local pet supply store, where he filled a cart with everything a new puppy owner could possibly need: a plush bed, food and water bowls, a collar and leash, toys, puppy food, and a crate for nighttime. Mr. Finch, true to his word, had already started on a simple fence for the backyard and waved away Marcus's effusive thanks. Been meaning to put one up anyway, the old man claimed, though they both knew it wasn't true. By the time Marcus arrived at the veterinary clinic, Chance was waiting by the reception desk, a bright blue bandana around his neck, making his golden fur seem even more luminous. The puppy's excited yips upon seeing Marcus brought smiles to everyone in the waiting room. Dr. Chen went over the care instructions one more time, emphasizing the importance of the follow-up appointment for Chance's leg. "And here," she added, handing Marcus a small envelope. "I took this yesterday. Thought you might want to have it." Inside was a photograph of Chance sitting alertly on an examination table, his head tilted inquisitively at the camera, one ear slightly flopped forward. It was adorable, and Marcus thanked the vet sincerely before clipping the new leash to Chance's collar and leading him out to the car. The drive home was filled with nervous excitement, both from Chance, who kept moving between looking out the window and turning to stare at Marcus, and from Marcus himself, who couldn't help wondering if he'd made an impulsive decision he might regret. Those doubts evaporated the moment they arrived at the cottage. Chance explored his new surroundings with boundless enthusiasm, sniffing every corner, wagging his tail at new discoveries, and returning to Marcus every few minutes as if checking in or sharing his excitement. That first evening established what would become their routine. After a simple dinner, during which Chance sat beside the table, eyes following every movement of Marcus's fork with hopeful intensity, they moved to the small living room. Marcus sat on the couch grading papers while Chance settled at his feet, occasionally sighing contentedly or repositioning himself to maintain maximum contact with his new human's legs. When it was time for bed, Marcus showed Chance the plush dog bed he'd placed in the corner of the bedroom. The puppy sniffed it curiously, circled it twice, then looked up at Marcus with an expression that clearly said, "You can't be serious." "That's your bed," Marcus explained, pointing to the plush cushion. "This is my bed," he added, indicating the human-sized mattress. Chance tilted his head, considering this information, then promptly jumped onto Marcus's bed and curled up on the pillow. "That's not how this works," Marcus protested, though he couldn't help laughing. He gently moved the puppy to the dog bed, praising him and offering a small treat as reward. 2 hours later, Marcus woke to the distinct sensation of a warm, furry body pressed against his back, soft puppy snores filling the darkness of the bedroom. Too tired to enforce the rules, he simply reached back to pat Chance's head and whispered, "Just for tonight." As the weeks passed, Chance grew stronger. The injured leg healed completely, leaving only a small scar hidden beneath his increasingly luxurious fur. He gained weight, filled out, and began to show the classic golden retriever traits: intelligence, friendliness, and an unquenchable desire to please his human. Marcus found himself restructuring his entire life around his new companion. Morning walks before school, lunchtime checks during his planning period, and evening training sessions became the framework of his days. Far from resenting these changes, he discovered that the routine gave his life a purpose and joy that had been missing for too long. The small town of Millfield embraced the new teacher in his golden shadow. Students begged to meet the puppy they'd heard so much about. Neighbors stopped to chat during walks, and even the school principal suggested that perhaps on special occasions, Chance might visit the classroom as a teaching assistant. For the first time since leaving Chicago, Marcus felt like he belonged. And as Chance grew from a scrawny, injured puppy into a handsome young dog with a perpetual smile and a gently wagging tail, Marcus realized that on that stormy night, he hadn't just rescued a dog. In many ways, Chance had rescued him too. By the time spring arrived in Millfield, Chance had transformed from the trembling, injured puppy Marcus had found in the storm into a magnificent young dog. At 10 months old, he was nearly full-grown, his golden coat gleaming in the sunshine, his movements fluid and graceful, despite the faint limp that emerged when he was tired, the only remaining evidence of his early trauma. Their life together had fallen into a comfortable rhythm. Each morning began with a run along the nature trails that bordered the small town, followed by breakfast on the porch where Chance had his own chair, a concession Marcus had made after weeks of pleading brown eyes. After school, they'd head to the dog park or practice training exercises in the now completed backyard. Evenings were spent with Marcus grading papers or preparing lessons, while Chance sprawled contentedly beside him, occasionally nudging a tennis ball into his lap as a not-so-subtle hint. "You've got that dog spoiled rotten," commented Nancy Williams, the elderly woman who lived next door, as she watched Marcus carefully measuring out Chance's special food one evening. "In my day, dogs ate scraps and slept outside." Marcus smiled, unfazed by the criticism. "Different times, Mrs. Williams. Besides, he earned it after everything he went through." The truth was, Marcus knew he'd gone a bit overboard. The cottage was now filled with dog toys, the refrigerator contained almost as much gourmet dog food as human food, and his phone was rapidly running out of storage space due to the thousands of photos of Chance in various adorable poses. But every time he looked at those intelligent brown eyes, he remembered the tiny, broken creature he'd rescued from the ditch, and any guilt about indulgence evaporated immediately. What surprised Marcus most was how Chance had changed him. Before the dog came into his life, he'd been quiet and withdrawn, a newcomer who kept to himself. Now, he knew nearly everyone in town, thanks to Chance's irrepressible friendliness and the conversations it sparked. The exercise they shared had improved his health and mood, and the responsibility of caring for another being had healed something inside him that had been broken long before he came to Millfield. In late April, an unexpected opportunity arose. Dr. Emilia Rodriguez, a renowned marine biologist and environmental educator, was scheduled to speak at a prestigious summer science program in Alaska. When one of her teaching assistants withdrew unexpectedly, the program director reached out to several schools searching for a replacement. Marcus's principal nominated him immediately. "It's perfect for you, Reed," Principal Garner insisted, leaning against Marcus's desk after school. 6 weeks in Alaska teaching alongside Dr. Rodriguez. The stipend is generous, and it would look impressive on your resume. Plus, I hear the fishing up there is incredible." Marcus stared at the colorful brochure the principal had handed him. The program sounded amazing. A chance to work with gifted high school students in one of the most beautiful locations on Earth, learning from a scientist whose work he'd admired for years. Before Chance, he would have accepted immediately. "I appreciate the recommendation, sir, but I have Chance to consider. I can't just leave him for 6 weeks. Principal Garner waved away his concern. "Bring him with you. Alaska's a dog paradise." But when Marcus called the program coordinator later that day, he learned that bringing Chance wouldn't be possible. The research station's strict biosecurity protocols prohibited personal pets, even well-behaved ones like Chance. That evening, Marcus sat on the porch steps, absently throwing a ball for Chance while weighing his options. The logical part of his brain argued that this was too good an opportunity to pass up. 6 weeks would fly by, and the experience would be invaluable for his career, but the thought of leaving Chance felt like contemplating leaving behind a part of himself. As if sensing his distress, Chance abandoned the ball and came to sit beside Marcus, resting his head on his human's knee. Marcus stroked the silky golden fur, drawing comfort from the warm weight against his leg. "What do you think, buddy? Should I go to Alaska and leave you behind for a while?" Chance looked up at him with those soulful brown eyes, then licked his hand once as if to say, "Do what you need to do. I'll be okay." Over the next few days, Marcus weighed his decision carefully. He discussed it with Dr. Chen during Chance's routine checkup, with Mr. Finch while they fixed a loose board in the fence, and even with Mrs. Williams, who surprised him by offering to look after his garden while he was away. But who would take care of Chance? Marcus wondered aloud during this last conversation. The boarding kennels in Lakeside are always full during summer vacation. Mrs. Williams shook her head. Not a kennel. That beautiful dog needs a home, even temporarily. The solution came unexpectedly the following week. Marcus had taken Chance to visit his classroom after school hours, a special treat the dog loved, as it meant unbridled attention from adoring teenagers. As they were leaving, they ran into Sofia Martinez, the school's Spanish teacher, who was just locking up her classroom. "Marcus and Chance," she exclaimed, kneeling to receive Chance's enthusiastic greeting. The dog had developed a particular fondness for Ms. Martinez, perhaps because she always smelled faintly of the cinnamon cookies she baked for her students. After exchanging pleasantries, Marcus mentioned his Alaska dilemma. "You know," Sofia said thoughtfully, scratching behind Chance's ears, "I've been thinking about getting a dog for ages, but I've been hesitant to commit. This could be perfect. I could test drive dog ownership by watching Chance while you're away. I've got the perfect setup, fenced yard, flexible summer schedule, and I live right by that nature trail he loves." The offer seemed too good to be true. Sofia was responsible, kind, and already had a bond with Chance. Most importantly, she lived locally, so Chance wouldn't have to adjust to a completely new environment. "Are you sure?" Marcus asked. 6 weeks is a long time, and he can be a handful," Sofia laughed. "Please, after managing 30 teenagers with raging hormones, one well-trained golden will be a vacation." Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus and Sofia arranged several practice runs. She came over to learn Chance's routine, his commands, and his quirks, like his insistence on carrying his favorite stuffed duck to bed every night, or how he'd only eat from the left side of his bowl. Chance, for his part, seemed delighted with the arrangement, especially when he discovered that Sofia's backyard contained a small pond where frogs made entertaining playmates. Before Marcus knew it, June had arrived, and with it, his departure date. The night before he was to leave, he sat on the living room floor with Chance, arms wrapped around the dog's warm body. "It's just 6 weeks, buddy," he murmured into the silky fur. "You be good for Sofia. No countersurfing, no digging up her flower beds, and absolutely no frog chasing in the house." Chance responded by flopping onto his back, offering his belly for scratches in clear disregard for the seriousness of the moment. The next morning, Marcus drove Chance to Sofia's house, the car loaded with dog food, toys, bedding, and detailed written instructions that Sofia accepted with barely concealed amusement. "We'll be fine," she assured him, as Chance happily explored his temporary home. "I'll send photos every day, and you can call whenever you want." "Thank you," Marcus said, his throat tight with unexpected emotion. "This means more than I can say." The moment of goodbye was harder than he'd anticipated. Chance seemed to understand that something significant was happening and pressed against Marcus's legs, looking up with questioning eyes that nearly broke his resolve. "I'll be back before you know it," Marcus promised, kneeling to embrace the dog one last time. "Be a good boy." As he drove away, he glanced in the rearview mirror to see Chance watching from Sofia's front window, golden fur glowing in the morning sunlight. The image stayed with him all the way to the airport, a bittersweet reminder of what he was leaving behind. Marcus couldn't know then that circumstances beyond his control would transform his promised 6-week absence into something much longer and more complicated. Nor could he imagine that when he and Chance finally reunited, the dog he'd rescued on that stormy night would have a chance to return the favor in ways neither of them could possibly foresee. The Alaskan wilderness exceeded all of Marcus's expectations. The research station, perched on a rocky outcrop overlooking a pristine bay, was more modern than he had anticipated, with well-equipped laboratories and comfortable living quarters. The 20 high school students selected for the program were exceptionally bright and motivated, their enthusiasm infectious, and Dr. Rodriguez proved to be not only a brilliant scientist, but also a warm, engaging mentor who treated Marcus as a valued colleague rather than a mere assistant. In those first weeks, Marcus fell into a productive routine. Mornings were spent on field excursions, collecting water samples, cataloging marine life, or tracking wildlife movements along the shoreline. Afternoons were dedicated to laboratory analysis and teaching sessions, and evenings often featured guest lectures from visiting researchers or informal discussions around the common room fireplace. Despite the intensive schedule, Marcus found time each evening to check in with Sophia about Chance. True to her word, she sent daily updates, photos of Chance playing in the pond, curled up on her couch, or making friends at the dog park. According to her reports, the golden retriever had adjusted smoothly to his temporary home, though he still carried his stuffed duck to bed every night and occasionally whined at the front door around the time Marcus would normally return from school. "He misses you," Sophia admitted during one of their video calls, as Chance's snout pushed into frame, ears perking at the sound of Marcus's voice. "But he's eating well and getting plenty of exercise. We've even started taking beginner agility classes at the rec center." These updates were bittersweet. While Marcus was relieved that Chance was being well cared for, each new skill or experience the dog acquired without him felt like a small loss, moments of Chance's life that he would never share. 4 weeks into the program, as Marcus was beginning to count down the days until his return to Millfield, Dr. Rodriguez called him into her office. The distinguished scientist seemed uncharacteristically hesitant as she motioned for him to take a seat. "Marcus, I'll get straight to the point. The Oceanic Research Foundation has just approved funding for an extended study following up on our preliminary findings about microplastic contamination in the bay. It's an incredible opportunity, 3 more months of work with a full research team." Marcus nodded, unsure where this was leading. "I've been authorized to select 2 educators to continue with the extended program," she continued. "The foundation wants us to develop a comprehensive curriculum based on our research that can be implemented in high schools nationwide. Your background in science education would be invaluable, and I've been extremely impressed with your work these past weeks." The implication was clear, and for a moment Marcus felt a surge of excitement. To be part of groundbreaking environmental research that could influence science education across the country was the kind of opportunity educators dreamed about. Then reality crashed in. "That would mean staying here until October?" he asked, mind racing to calculate the extended timeline. Dr. Rodriguez nodded. "I understand it's a significant commitment. The stipend would be substantially increased, of course, and the foundation would cover any reasonable expenses related to extending your stay." "I'm incredibly honored," Marcus began, "but I have commitments back home. My teaching position, my house, my dog. The school year hasn't started yet. I've already spoken with Principal Garner, who assures me he could arrange a substitute for the first semester if needed. As for your housing and personal matters," she spread her hands, "the foundation has resources to help sort those details." Marcus spent the next days in turmoil. Professionally, the decision seemed obvious. This was a career-defining opportunity that could open doors he'd never even considered knocking on. But personally, the thought of not returning to Millfield to Chance as promised felt like a betrayal. His nightly calls with Sophia became agonizing, especially when she would turn the camera toward Chance, who would tilt his head at the sound of Marcus's voice from the phone, ears perked hopefully. "I don't know what to do," he confessed to Sophia during one such call, after explaining Dr. Rodriguez's offer. "This research could make a real difference in how we teach environmental science. It's everything I've worked toward professionally." Sophia was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "What's holding you back? Really?" The answer was simple and complicated all at once. "Chance," he said finally. "I promised him I'd be back in 6 weeks. He won't understand why I've stayed away so much longer." "He's doing well here," Sophia assured him, as Chance rested his head on her lap, eyes half closed in contentment. "We've gotten into a good routine, and if it helps you make your decision, I wouldn't mind keeping him a bit longer." That night, Marcus walked along the bay's edge, the midnight sun casting a surreal glow over the landscape. The beauty of Alaska was undeniable, the research meaningful, yet his thoughts kept returning to a golden dog with trusting eyes and a slightly crooked tail wag. Was he really considering turning down the opportunity of a lifetime for a pet he'd had less than a year? But Chance wasn't just a pet. He was the being who had pulled Marcus out of his self-imposed isolation, who had taught him to open his heart again after he'd locked it away following the painful end of his engagement in Chicago. The dog had given him a purpose when he'd been merely going through the motions of living. In the end, Marcus crafted a compromise. He would accept Dr. Rodriguez's offer, but with conditions. He would need to return to Millfield for at least a week before the extended program began. Time to properly settle Chance with Sophia, arrange for his house to be looked after, and prepare materials for his replacement at school. Additionally, he requested a week-long break midway through the extended program to check in at home. Dr. Rodriguez readily agreed, and preparations began immediately. Marcus booked his flight back to Millfield, his mind alternating between excitement about the research opportunity and anxious anticipation of reuniting with Chance. The flight from Anchorage to Minneapolis was uneventful, but as the plane approached the Chicago airport for his connecting flight to Springfield, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to severe thunderstorms in the Chicago area, we're currently in a holding pattern. We've been advised that all inbound flights are delayed and many outbound connections are being canceled. We'll provide more information as it becomes available." By the time Marcus's flight finally landed, 3 hours behind schedule, he had missed his connection, and the next available flight wasn't until the following afternoon. Frustrated but resigned, he collected his luggage and found a hotel near the airport, sending Sophia an apologetic text explaining the delay. The next morning, Marcus woke to alert notifications flooding his phone. Overnight, a powerful derecho storm system had swept through the Midwest, causing widespread destruction and power outages. All flights in and out of Chicago were canceled indefinitely, and major highways were closed due to downed trees and power lines. Turning on the television in his hotel room, Marcus watched in disbelief as news footage showed the devastation. The region, including Millfield and surrounding counties, had been hit particularly hard. Reports mentioned widespread power outages expected to last days, possibly weeks in more remote areas. Frantically, Marcus tried calling Sophia, but the call wouldn't connect. Text messages showed as undelivered. In desperation, he tried Mr. Finch, the school, even the local police station. Nothing went through. Stranded in Chicago with no way to reach Millfield and no information about Chance's welfare, Marcus felt a rising panic. The irony wasn't lost on him. Another storm had brought Chance into his life, and now a storm was keeping them apart. What Marcus couldn't know was that back in Millfield, the situation was far more complicated than mere power outages and downed communication lines. The storm had unleashed a series of events that would put Chance in a position no one could have anticipated, one that would test everything the resilient golden retriever had learned in his young life and ultimately lead to a reunion that would indeed prove something truly incredible. The storm hit Millfield with apocalyptic fury. Sophia Martinez had never seen anything like it. The weather forecast had predicted severe thunderstorms, but nothing had prepared the town for the wall of wind that descended upon them just after midnight, ripping roofs from buildings, toppling century-old trees, and transforming peaceful streets into obstacle courses of debris. When the first thunder rumbled, Chance had immediately sought refuge in Sophia's bedroom, trembling beneath the covers. Whether he was reliving the trauma of being abandoned during a storm as a puppy or simply displaying the typical canine aversion to loud noises, his distress was evident. Sophia sat with him, stroking his golden fur and speaking soothing words that were frequently drowned out by crashes of thunder and the howling wind. "It's okay, boy," she murmured as the lights flickered and died, plunging the house into darkness. "We're safe inside." But as the night wore on and the storm's intensity increased, Sophia began to question her own reassurances. The sound of something large, a tree branch perhaps, smashing against the side of the house made her jump. Chance whimpered, pressing closer to her side, his usual confidence replaced by primal fear. By dawn, the worst had passed, but the scene outside Sophia's window was one of devastation. Her backyard, once neatly landscaped, was now littered with branches and debris. The small tool shed had been crushed by a fallen oak, and the fence that contained her property and kept Chance safely enclosed had several sections completely destroyed. With no electricity and no cell service, Sophia felt strangely isolated despite being in the middle of town. She dressed quickly and attached Chance's leash for their cautious venture outside. The golden retriever seemed reluctant to leave the house, uncharacteristically sticking to her side as they picked their way through the debris-strewn yard. The street beyond was barely recognizable. Neighbors were already out looking shell-shocked as they surveyed the damage to their properties. Mrs. Abernathy from across the street was attempting to salvage soaked family photos from her partially collapsed roof. The Chen family was working together to move a fallen tree that blocked their driveway. "Sophia, thank God you're all right," called Mr. Finch, making his way toward her. The elderly landlord looked exhausted, his usually impeccable clothing rumpled and stained. The storm took out everything: power, phones, the water treatment plant. The mayor's set up an emergency center at the high school. They're saying it could be weeks before everything's restored. Sophia felt a pang of alarm. "Weeks? But I need to contact Marcus. He's supposed to be flying back today." Mr. Finch shook his head grimly. "Roads in and out of town are blocked by downed trees and power lines. The highway bridge over Miller Creek got washed out. No one's getting in or out anytime soon." This news settled like a stone in Sophia's stomach. Marcus would be frantic with worry when he couldn't reach her. And what about his plans to return to Alaska? Everything was suddenly terribly complicated. "Listen," Mr. Finch continued, "I'm checking on all the neighbors. Do you have enough food and water to manage for a few days?" Sophia mentally inventoried her supplies. Her pantry was reasonably well stocked and she had several gallons of bottled water for emergencies. But Chance's food was another story. She had perhaps 3 days' worth left, having planned to buy more when Marcus returned. "I think so," she said, not wanting to add to the old man's burden. "We'll manage." The day passed in a blur of activity. Sophia joined her neighbors in clearing debris, checking on elderly residents and sharing information. Chance stayed close, seemingly unwilling to let Sophia out of his sight in the strange new landscape of their transformed neighborhood. His usual boundless energy was subdued, replaced by a watchful alertness that reminded Sophia of how he'd been when they first met. Cautious and hypervigilant. By late afternoon, Sophia had learned that the situation was even worse than initially thought. The storm had caused flash flooding along Miller Creek, which ran through the center of Millfield. The elementary school, located in the low-lying area near the creek, was partially underwater. Several families had been evacuated from the flood zone and were now sheltering at the high school, which sat on higher ground. As darkness fell on the first day after the storm, Sophia lit candles and prepared a simple dinner for herself and Chance. The golden retriever ate half-heartedly, his attention frequently drawn to the windows, as if expecting another onslaught from nature. "Marcus will be worried sick," Sophia murmured, more to herself than to Chance. But at the mention of his owner's name, the dog's ears perked up, and he tilted his head in that questioning manner that always reminded her of his intelligence. "I know, boy. You miss him. He'll be back as soon as he can." 3 days later, conditions in Millfield had improved only marginally. National Guard troops had arrived to help clear roads and distribute emergency supplies, but power was still out across most of the town, and communication with the outside world remained limited to a few satellite phones at the emergency center. Sophia had managed to send a brief message to Marcus through the Red Cross emergency system, assuring him that she and Chance were safe, but she knew it contained too little information to truly ease his mind. Meanwhile, Chance's food supply was dwindling, and the dog had begun to display signs of increasing anxiety, pacing, whining at the door, and sleeping fitfully. On the 4th night after the storm, Sophia was awakened by Chance's urgent barking. The golden retriever stood at her bedroom door, his posture rigid, his bark insistent in a way she'd never heard before. "What is it, boy?" she asked groggily, fumbling for the flashlight she'd kept by her bed. Chance continued barking, then ran to the top of the stairs, looking back at her expectantly. When she didn't immediately follow, he returned, gently but firmly tugging at her sleeve with his teeth. Alarmed now, Sophia followed him downstairs. The smell hit her immediately, smoke, acrid and unmistakable. In the dim beam of her flashlight, she could see tendrils of it seeping through the wall, separating her living room from the kitchen. "Fire," she gasped, suddenly fully awake. Without electricity, she couldn't imagine what had caused it, but there was no time to wonder. She ran to the kitchen door, but jerked her hand back with a cry of pain when she touched the knob. The metal was scorching hot, the door itself beginning to warp from the heat behind it. Chance barked again, this time moving toward the front door. The message was clear. They needed to get out, now. Sophia grabbed her emergency bag, prepared after the first day of the disaster, and followed Chance to the front door. Outside, she could see the glow of flames beginning to illuminate her kitchen windows. "Mrs. Chen," she called, running toward her neighbor's house. "Fire. My house is on fire." The response was immediate. Despite the late hour, people emerged from their homes, a well-coordinated bucket brigade quickly forming from the creek that ran behind the row of houses. But the fire, fueled by the dry wooden structure of Sophia's old house, spread rapidly. In the chaos, Sophia didn't immediately notice that Chance was no longer by her side. When she realized he was missing, panic seized her. "Chance," she called, scanning the crowd of neighbors and the growing number of onlookers. "Has anyone seen Chance?" Her blood ran cold when Mrs. Chen pointed toward the burning house. I think he went back inside." Sophia lunged toward her home, but strong hands held her back. "You can't go in there," insisted Tom Bailey, the town's volunteer fire chief. "The structure is becoming unstable." "But Chance is in there," Sophia cried, struggling against his grip. "Marcus trusted me with him. I can't let anything happen to him." Inside the burning house, Chance was indeed on a mission. After leading Sophia to safety, some instinct, perhaps memory of his own rescue on a stormy night, had driven him back into the danger. The smoke was thick now, burning his eyes and lungs, but his keen senses guided him through the familiar space. He knew what he needed to find. The heat inside the house was suffocating, but Chance pressed on, staying low where the air was marginally clearer. His eyes burned from the smoke, and each breath felt like fire in his lungs. Yet something drove him forward, an instinct stronger than self-preservation. He made his way to Sophia's bedroom, navigating through the thickening smoke by memory. There, on the nightstand where it always sat during their nightly routine, was what he sought. The stuffed duck that Marcus had given him, the toy he'd carried to bed every night since coming to live with Sophia. It was more than just a plaything. It was his connection to Marcus, carrying his scent and the memory of countless evenings spent together. Chance grabbed the duck in his teeth and turned to retrace his steps, but the smoke had grown denser in just those few moments. He hesitated, momentarily disoriented as the familiar path disappeared in the swirling gray haze. A sharp crack overhead sent splinters of burning wood raining down around him. The house was collapsing. Outside, Sophia watched in horror as part of the roof caved in with a thunderous crash. The small volunteer fire brigade was fighting valiantly but losing the battle against the rapidly spreading flames. "Please," she begged anyone who would listen, tears streaming down her face. "Someone please help him." But no one would risk entering the inferno, and as the minutes ticked by without any sign of the golden dog, hope began to fade. Sophia sank to her knees on the wet grass, overwhelmed by the thought of having to tell Marcus that his beloved companion had perished trying to save. What? What could have possibly driven Chance back into that burning building? A sudden commotion near the side of the house drew everyone's attention. Through a side window that had shattered from the heat, a golden shape burst through, trailing smoke and ash. Chance tumbled onto the ground, coughing and wheezing, his beautiful coat singed in places and gray with soot, but alive. And clutched firmly in his mouth, somehow still intact, was his stuffed duck. "Chance!" Sophia cried, rushing to the exhausted dog. He looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes, his breathing labored but his tail offering a weak wag of recognition. Gently, she helped him further away from the burning structure, where a neighbor with veterinary training immediately began examining him. "He's suffering from smoke inhalation," the man reported, listening to Chance's lungs with a stethoscope borrowed from the emergency medical kit. "His paws are burned too, but not severely. He needs oxygen and fluids, but the nearest vet clinic with power is in Grantsville, 30 miles away." "The roads are still blocked in that direction," someone in the crowd pointed out. "I'll take him on the ATV," volunteered Michael Chen, the teenage son of Sophia's neighbor. "I know the back trails, we can get through where cars can't." Within minutes, a makeshift transport was arranged. Chance, still clutching his duck despite his injuries, was carefully wrapped in a clean blanket and secured in a carrier attached to the ATV. Sophia insisted on accompanying them, climbing onto the back of the vehicle behind Michael. "Be careful," warned Tom Bailey. "Those trails will be a mess after the storm." "We'll manage," Michael replied with the confidence of youth. "My dad and I cleared most of the major blockages yesterday. We should be able to get through." As they set off into the darkness, navigating by headlamp through the debris-strewn countryside, Sophia kept one hand on Chance's carrier, offering whatever comfort she could. The golden retriever's breathing was ragged, painful to hear, but his eyes remained alert, fixed on her face as if seeking reassurance. "You're going to be okay," she promised, though fear tightened her throat. "We'll get you help, and then we'll find a way to contact Marcus. He's going to be so proud of you." At the mention of Marcus's name, Chance's tail thumped weakly against the side of the carrier. Even now, injured and exhausted, his loyalty remained unshaken. The journey to Grantsville took nearly 2 hours on the treacherous trails. Twice they had to stop and clear fallen branches, and once they were forced to ford a swollen stream where a footbridge had been washed away. By the time they reached the small animal hospital on the outskirts of town, dawn was breaking, casting a surreal golden light over the storm-ravaged landscape. Dr. Powell, the veterinarian, had been working nearly non-stop since the storm, treating animals injured in the disaster. Despite her obvious exhaustion, she immediately took charge when they arrived with Chance. "Smoke inhalation, burns to the paws, possible internal injuries," she murmured, conducting a quick initial examination. "Let's get him on oxygen right away." Sophia waited anxiously in the small reception area, her clothes still smelling of smoke, her own minor burns and cuts forgotten in her concern for Chance. Michael had returned to Millfield to report on their safe arrival, promising to come back later with news from town. After what seemed like hours, Dr. Neem Towell emerged from the treatment room, her expression cautiously optimistic. "He's stable," she reported. "The smoke inhalation is serious but not life-threatening. His airways are irritated but not severely damaged. The burns on his paws are superficial, though they'll be painful for a while. What concerns me more is the strain on his heart, the exertion and stress combined with the smoke. Well, we'll need to monitor him closely for the next 48 hours. But he'll recover? Sophia asked, her voice small. Barring complications, yes, he's young and strong, and from what you've told me, he's survived difficult circumstances before. The vet smiled slightly. And he seems exceptionally determined. He wouldn't let go of that toy until I promised to keep it right next to him. Relief washed over Sophia in a wave so powerful it nearly buckled her knees. Can I see him? Dr. Powell led her to a small recovery area where Chance lay on a clean blanket, an oxygen mask fitted over his muzzle. His normally lustrous coat was dull with soot despite their attempts to clean him, and his paws were wrapped in light bandages. But when he saw Sophia, his tail began to thump weakly against the blanket, and his eyes, though tired, held a spark of recognition. "Hey, brave boy," Sophia whispered, kneeling beside him. "You gave me quite a scare." Chance's eyes drifted to the stuffed duck, which Dr. Powell had placed beside him as promised. Sophia picked it up, noting how, despite everything, the dog had somehow managed to protect it from the worst of the fire damage. "Was this what you went back for?" she asked, gently placing the toy within reach of his bandaged paw. All that risk for a stuffed duck? But looking at the way Chance immediately relaxed once the toy was secure beside him, Sophia understood. This wasn't just any toy. It was his connection to Marcus, a tangible reminder of the man who had rescued him on a stormy night and given him a home. Over the next 2 days, Sophia barely left Chance's side. She slept in a chair beside his recovery bed, waking whenever he stirred, speaking soothingly when nightmares seemed to trouble his sleep. Dr. Powell, impressed by their bond, allowed the arrangement despite it being against normal protocol. By the 3rd day, Chance was breathing comfortably without supplemental oxygen, and the burns on his paws were healing nicely. His energy was returning, though Dr. Powell cautioned against any strenuous activity. "He's not out of the woods yet," she warned. "That heart concern I mentioned. I'm still picking up an occasional arrhythmia. Nothing immediately dangerous, but something we should investigate further when possible." Sophia nodded, adding this to her mental list of things to tell Marcus whenever she managed to reach him. So far, her attempts to call out of Grantsville had been unsuccessful. The storm had affected communications throughout the region. On the afternoon of their 4th day in Grantsville, Michael Chen returned with news from Millfield. Power had been restored to parts of town, the main road was partially cleared, and the emergency center had established more reliable communication with the outside world. "They've been getting messages to people's families," he reported. "Mr. Jenkins at the emergency center specifically asked about you and Chance. Apparently someone's been calling every few hours asking for updates." Sophia's heart leapt. "Marcus, it has to be him. Mr. Jenkins said they've told him you're both safe in Grantsville, but communication is still spotty. He's trying to arrange transportation back to Millfield." "That won't be necessary," came a new voice from the doorway. Sophia turned, and there, looking exhausted and disheveled but wonderfully, blessedly present, stood Marcus Reed. Time seemed to freeze in that moment. Sophia stood motionless, processing the reality of Marcus's sudden appearance. Then Chance's reaction broke the spell. The golden retriever's entire body quivered, his eyes, now fully alert, fixed on the figure in the doorway. He attempted to rise, whimpering with a mixture of excitement and the pain from his healing paws. "Easy, boy," Marcus murmured, his voice thick with emotion as he quickly crossed the room and knelt beside the recovery bed. "I'm here now." Chance's tail thumped wildly against the blanket, his body wriggling with joy despite his injuries. As Marcus gently enfolded the dog in his arms, burying his face in the smoke-scented golden fur, Chance made a sound somewhere between a whimper and a purr. a sound of such pure contentment that Sophia felt tears spring to her eyes. "How on earth did you get here?" she asked, finally finding her voice. "The roads are still mostly impassable." Marcus looked up, his arms still around Chance, who was determinedly trying to lick every inch of his face. "It wasn't easy," he admitted. "I flew into Springfield as soon as air traffic resumed, then rented a four-wheel drive. The main highways were still closed, but I met a National Guard unit who let me follow them as far as the county line. After that, it was a combination of back roads, bribing a local guide with emergency supplies, and the last 5 miles on foot, when even the four-wheel drive couldn't make it through." Michael Chen let out a low whistle of admiration. "That's hardcore, sir." Marcus smiled faintly. "When it's someone you love, you find a way." He gently disentangled himself from Chance's enthusiastic greeting. Though he kept one hand resting on the dog's head, his gaze fell on the stuffed duck now nestled securely against Chance's side. "You still have your duck, huh, buddy?" Sophia stepped forward. "That's what he went back into the fire for. Not food, not water, just that toy." Marcus looked up sharply. "What fire?" "What?" Over the next hour, Sophia and Michael filled Marcus in on everything that had happened. The devastating storm, the days without power or communication, and finally the fire that had destroyed Sophia's home and nearly claimed Chance's life. "He saved me first," Sophia explained, recounting how Chance had awakened her and insisted she leave the house. "If he hadn't alerted me to the fire—" She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "Then he went back in for the duck," Michael added, still clearly impressed by the dog's bravery. "Through all that smoke and fire, it was like he knew exactly what he wanted and wouldn't leave without it." Marcus listened intently, his expression shifting from concern to pride to something deeper and more complex. When they finished, he was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking Chance's ear in that particular way that made the dog's eyes close in bliss. "I always knew he was special," he said finally. From that first night in the storm, there was something in his eyes, an understanding, a depth of feeling that went beyond ordinary animal intelligence. He looked at Sophia, his gaze direct and sincere. "Thank you for taking care of him, for saving him. I can never repay what you've done." Sophia shook her head. "If anything, I owe you. He saved my life, Marcus, and—" She hesitated, glancing at the golden retriever who was now resting peacefully, secure in his owner's presence. "These past weeks with him have been incredible. Even with all the chaos and worry, having him there made everything better somehow." Dr. Powell joined them, clipboard in hand. "I hate to interrupt this reunion, but I need to discuss Chance's condition and ongoing care." She addressed Marcus directly. "Are you planning to transport him back to Millfield soon?" Marcus looked uncertain. "I haven't thought that far ahead. I just wanted to find him to make sure he was all right." He glanced around. "Is there somewhere we could talk privately?" The veterinarian led them to a small consultation room, leaving Michael to sit with Chance. Once they were settled, her expression grew more serious. "Mr. Reed, Chance is recovering well from his immediate injuries, the burns and smoke inhalation. But I'm concerned about an underlying cardiac issue that the stress of the fire may have exacerbated." Marcus frowned. "Cardiac issue? He's always been incredibly healthy." "Sometimes these conditions don't manifest until the heart is under extreme stress," Dr. Powell explained. "I've detected an intermittent arrhythmia, an irregular heartbeat. It could be temporary, a result of the trauma, or it could indicate a more serious underlying condition." "What kind of condition?" Sophia asked, her hand unconsciously finding Marcus's arm in support. "Possibly a congenital heart defect or early-stage cardiomyopathy. Without more sophisticated diagnostic equipment than what I have here, I can't be certain." Dr. Powell tapped her pen against the clipboard. What I can tell you is that he needs rest, minimal stress, and ideally, an examination by a veterinary cardiologist within the next few weeks." Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing this information. "The nearest specialist would be in Chicago, I imagine?" "Actually, there's an excellent veterinary cardiology center in Springfield," Dr. Powell replied. "They have all the necessary equipment for a comprehensive evaluation." "Springfield," Marcus repeated, his mind racing. "That's about 3 hours from Millfield under normal conditions." "More like 5 or 6 with the current road situations," Sophia added. "But Marcus, what about your research position in Alaska? Weren't you supposed to return next week?" The question hung in the air, highlighting the complexity of their situation. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Sophia recognized as a sign of his internal conflict. "I need to call Dr. Rodriguez," he said finally. "Explain what's happened. After everything you've told me about how Chance saved you from the fire, how he's been injured, I can't just leave him again." Dr. Powell closed her folder. "I'll give you some privacy to make your calls and decisions. Chance is stable enough to travel short distances if necessary, but I'd recommend at least 1 more day of observation here before you move him." After she left, Sophia and Marcus sat in silence for a moment. Finally, Sophia spoke, her voice gentle. "Marcus, I know how important that research position is to your career. If you need to go back to Alaska, I can take Chance to the cardiologist in Springfield. My school will be closed for repairs for at least another month and—" "No," Marcus interrupted, his decision suddenly crystallizing. "I'm not leaving him, not now." He reached for her hand, squeezing it gratefully. "But I can't ask you to keep taking care of him either. You've already lost your home because of him." "I didn't lose my home because of Chance," Sophia corrected firmly. "I still have a home because of him. Everything else is just stuff. It can be replaced." Her eyes held his steadily. "And for what it's worth, these weeks with him have been a gift. I've always wanted a dog, but never quite had the courage to make that commitment. Chance showed me what I was missing." Marcus studied her face, noticing perhaps for the first time the smudges of exhaustion under her eyes, the minor burns on her hands that she hadn't bothered to mention, the fierce protectiveness she'd developed for his dog. Something shifted in his perception of her. No longer just a friendly colleague who'd done him a favor, but someone who had fought for and loved Chance as much as he did. "We'll figure it out together," he said finally. "One step at a time." When they returned to Chance's recovery area, the golden retriever was sleeping peacefully, his stuffed duck tucked securely under his chin. But as if sensing their presence, his eyes fluttered open, and his tail began its familiar, gentle thumping against the blanket. Marcus sat beside the bed, gently running his fingers through the silky fur between Chance's ears. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. "Quite an adventure you've had, huh? But we're together now. That's what matters." Chance's eyes, warm and intelligent as ever, moved between Marcus and Sophia, and his tail wagged a little harder, as if he understood perfectly well what mattered most. The following day, Dr. Powell discharged Chance with a detailed list of care instructions and medications. The decision about where to go next wasn't easy. Millfield was still in recovery mode. Parts of town remained without power. Cleanup crews worked around the clock clearing debris, and many residents, including Sophia, had lost their homes. Meanwhile, the veterinary cardiologist in Springfield couldn't see Chance for another week. "You could both stay with me," Marcus offered as they sat in the small motel room he'd managed to secure in Grantsville. The cottage wasn't damaged beyond some minor roof issues that Mr. Finch already patched. Sophia shook her head. "I appreciate that, but I've arranged to stay with my sister in Springfield until school reopens. It makes sense for me to be there anyway, to start looking for a new place." She glanced at Chance, who was dozing on the motel bed, his bandaged paws stretched out before him. Besides, having Chance in Springfield would make it easier for his cardiology appointment. Marcus nodded slowly, seeing the logic but feeling strangely reluctant to separate from either of them. The past days had created a bond between the three of them that was difficult to define but impossible to ignore. "What about your Alaska position?" Sophia asked gently. Marcus sighed, rubbing his eyes. He'd spoken with Dr. Rodriguez the previous evening, explaining the situation in detail. She had been understanding but firm. The extended research program required his full commitment. If he couldn't return within the week, they would need to find another educator. "I turned it down," he admitted. I can't leave again. Not now." He looked at Chance, sleeping peacefully, trustingly. "He nearly died trying to save something that reminded him of me. How could I possibly walk away from that kind of devotion?" Sophia studied his face, noting the mix of resolution and regret. "Will you regret it? That was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." "Some things are more important than career opportunities," Marcus replied simply. "I learned that the night I found him in that ditch." They agreed on a compromise. Marcus would return to Millfield to set his house in order and take care of loose ends at school, while Sophia would take Chance to her sister's place in Springfield, ensuring he was rested and calm before his appointment with the cardiologist. "It's just for a few days," Marcus assured Chance as they prepared to part ways outside the motel. The golden retriever seemed to understand something significant was happening. His eyes moved anxiously between Marcus and Sophia, and he pressed closer to Marcus's leg. "We'll take good care of each other," Sophia promised, kneeling to gently stroke Chance's head. "And we'll video call every night so he can see you." Marcus nodded, a lump forming in his throat as he crouched to embrace his dog. "Be a good boy for Sophia," he whispered. "I'll see you very soon." Chance watched with evident confusion as Marcus climbed into his rented SUV and drove away, his bandaged paw lifting slightly as if waving goodbye. Sophia's heart ached at the sight, but she guided him gently toward her sister's car. "Come on, sweet boy. This is just another adventure." The days passed in a blur of activity. In Millfield, Marcus threw himself into community recovery efforts, volunteering with cleanup crews during the day and spending evenings helping Mr. Finch repair storm damage to neighboring properties. The physical labor was exhausting but therapeutic, giving him little time to dwell on his abandoned research opportunity or to worry excessively about Chance. Each night, as promised, he video called Sophia. Chance's reaction to seeing him on screen was both heartwarming and heart-wrenching. The dog would paw at the phone, whimpering softly, his tail wagging with desperate hope. But as Sophia reported, he was healing well, adjusting to her sister's spacious home, and even making friends with the neighbor's cat, a development that amused them both given Chance's previous determined squirrel chasing in Millfield. The morning of Chance's cardiology appointment arrived with unexpected tension. Marcus had planned to drive to Springfield that day, but a collapsed bridge on the main highway had forced a lengthy detour, meaning he wouldn't arrive until evening, hours after the appointment. "I'll take detailed notes," Sophia assured him during their morning call, "and ask all the questions on your list." On the video screen, Marcus could see Chance in the background, his burns nearly healed, the bandages gone from his paws. The stuffed duck remained his constant companion, carried gently from room to room despite Sophia's sister's attempts to interest him in newer, fancier toys. "Thank you," Marcus said, meaning it for everything. Her care of Chance, her sacrifice of her home, her continued support. "I don't know what we'd have done without you." The wait for news of the cardiology appointment was excruciating. Marcus had just reached the outskirts of Springfield when his phone rang, Sophia's name flashing on the screen. He pulled over immediately, heart pounding. "How was it? What did they say?" he asked without preamble. There was a brief silence, then Sophia's voice, carefully controlled but unable to hide a tremor of emotion. "The news it's not what we hoped for, Marcus." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Tell me," he managed, gripping the steering wheel to steady himself. "It's called dilated cardiomyopathy, DCM," Sophia explained, her voice slipping into the measured tone she used when teaching difficult concepts to her students. "It's a condition where the heart becomes enlarged and can't pump blood efficiently. The cardiologist says it's probably congenital, something he was born with, but it might have been accelerated by the stress of the fire and smoke inhalation." Marcus closed his eyes, absorbing the blow. "What's the prognosis, the treatment?" "There are medications that can help manage the symptoms and slow progression. Diet changes, activity restrictions. They've already started him on 2 different heart medications." She paused. "But Marcus, they can't cure it. They say without treatment he might have 6 months to a year. With aggressive management, maybe 2 to 3 years. Maybe longer if we're lucky, and he responds well." 2 to 3 years. The words echoed in Marcus's mind. Chance was barely a year old. He should have had a decade or more ahead of him. "There's a specialist at the University Veterinary Hospital in Chicago," Sophia continued, rushing now as if afraid he might break down if she paused. "Dr. Patel thinks he might be a candidate for an experimental treatment they're developing. It's not a cure, but it could extend his life significantly. I've already made an appointment for next month." Marcus nodded, though she couldn't see him. "Text me the address. I'm leaving now." "The appointment is for next month," Sophia repeated, misunderstanding. "I meant the address where you are now," Marcus clarified. "I need to see him. Tonight." An hour later, Marcus knocked on the door of a cheerful blue bungalow in a quiet Springfield neighborhood. Sophia opened it immediately, her face showing the strain of the day, but her eyes warming at the sight of him. And then Chance was there, pushing past her legs, his whole body quivering with joy as he launched himself at Marcus, nearly knocking him backward down the porch steps. The duck dangled from his mouth, almost as if he were presenting a gift. Marcus knelt, wrapping his arms around the warm, solid body of his dog, inhaling the familiar scent of his fur, feeling the strong thump of his tail against his leg, and beneath his hand, pressing against Chance's chest, he could feel it, the too rapid, slightly irregular beat of his heart, working too hard, betraying the hidden weakness within. "It's okay, buddy," he whispered, fighting back tears as Chance whined and licked his face, overcome with happiness at their reunion. "We're going to figure this out." Sophia stood in the doorway, watching them with glistening eyes. When Marcus finally looked up at her, still holding Chance close, she saw something in his expression that transcended mere determination. It was a fierce, almost primal resolve, the look of someone who had found something worth fighting for with every ounce of his strength. "Come inside," she said softly. "My sister's made dinner. We can talk about what happens next." As they stepped into the warm light of the house, Chance trotting happily between them, Marcus felt strangely calm despite the devastating news. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but he wasn't walking it alone. Somehow, against all odds, this golden dog with the damaged heart had created a connection neither of them had anticipated, but both now recognized as something precious and worth preserving. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The specialist's office at Chicago's University Veterinary Hospital had walls painted a calming shade of blue and floors designed to minimize the clickety-clack of nervous paws. Yet despite these thoughtful touches, the atmosphere remained undeniably clinical. Marcus sat rigidly in a molded plastic chair, Chance lying patiently at his feet, the now inseparable duck tucked between his front paws. Beside him, Sophia flipped through a dog magazine without really seeing the pages. 1 month had passed since the initial diagnosis. In that time, they had established a new routine centered around Chance's care. Marcus had taken a leave of absence from his teaching position, a decision the school board had approved with unexpected compassion after learning of the circumstances. He had moved temporarily to Springfield, renting a small apartment just a few blocks from Sophia's sister's house, where Sophia was still staying while insurance issues for her destroyed home were being resolved. Each morning began with Chance's medications, a complex regimen of heart drugs that had to be administered precisely 12 hours apart. Then came gentle exercise, brief, slow walks that left the formerly energetic dog frustratingly unsatisfied but were necessary to prevent overtaxing his compromised heart. Throughout the day, they monitored his breathing, his energy levels, his appetite, every detail meticulously recorded in a journal that now sat in Sophia's lap, ready to be shared with Dr. Patel, the cardiology specialist they were about to meet. Chance Reed, called a veterinary technician, appearing at the door with a clipboard. Marcus stood, gently guiding Chance to his feet. The golden retriever rose obediently, tail wagging despite the unfamiliar surroundings. Sophia gathered their notes and followed, her hand briefly touching Marcus's back in silent support. Dr. Patel was younger than they had expected, with kind eyes behind stylish glasses and a gentle manner that immediately put both humans and dog at ease. She spent nearly 20 minutes just observing Chance, watching him move around the examination room, listening to his heart from different angles, reviewing the detailed records they had brought. "I've received Dr. Wilson's files from Springfield," she said finally, settling into a chair across from them. "And I've reviewed all the tests, echocardiograms, and medication responses." She smiled softly at Chance, who had settled between Marcus and Sophia, his head resting against Marcus's leg. "He's a beautiful dog, very well behaved." "He's special," Marcus said simply, "more than I can explain." "I can see that," Dr. Patel nodded. "And I understand he's quite the hero, saving Ms. Martinez from the house fire despite his own vulnerability." "That's why we're here," Sophia interjected, leaning forward. "He's given so much. We want to give him every chance possible." Dr. Patel's expression grew more serious. "I want to be clear about the experimental treatment program we're considering. It's not a cure for DCM. What we're doing is testing a combination therapy that targets both the symptoms and some of the underlying mechanisms of the disease. The goal is to significantly slow progression and extend quality of life." "How significantly?" Marcus asked, the question that had been burning inside him for weeks. "In our preliminary trials with similar cases, we've seen dogs maintain good quality of life for 3 to 5 years post-diagnosis rather than the typical 1 to 3 years with standard treatment." She held up a cautioning hand. "But every case is different. Chance's relatively young age works in his favor, but the damage from the fire incident is a complicating factor." "And the risks?" Sophia asked, her teacher's mind automatically assessing both sides of the equation. "Side effects can include digestive issues, changes in energy levels, and in some cases, liver stress that requires additional medication." Dr. Patel glanced down at Chance, who was watching her with that uncanny focus he sometimes displayed, as if understanding every word. "The treatment involves weekly injections for the first 2 months, then bi-weekly for 4 months, then monthly ongoing. It would mean regular trips to Chicago, at least initially." Marcus and Sophia exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Over the past weeks, they had fallen into a partnership built around Chance's care, trading responsibilities, supporting each other through moments of fear and hope, celebrating small victories like a good day with more energy or an enthusiastic appetite. "We want to try," Marcus said firmly. "Whatever it takes." Dr. Patel nodded as if she had expected nothing less. "There's something else you should know. Because this is an experimental program, we track results very carefully. We've found that consistency in environment and routine makes a significant difference in outcomes. Changes in living situation, caretakers, or even daily schedules can create stress that impacts heart function. What are you saying exactly? Sophia asked. I'm saying that the arrangement you two have now, shared care, consistent routine, minimal separation from either of you, seems to be working well for Chance. His condition has stabilized more quickly than I would have expected after such a traumatic event. I would recommend maintaining that stability as much as possible throughout the treatment. The implications hung in the air. Marcus and Sophia had been operating under the assumption that their current arrangement was temporary, a stopgap measure until Millfield fully recovered from the storm, until Sophia found a new home, until Marcus decided what to do about his teaching position. Now, Dr. Patel was suggesting that this shared guardianship might be the best thing for Chance's survival. We'll figure it out, Sophia said softly, reaching down to stroke Chance's ear. Won't we, boy? Chance responded with a gentle thump of his tail against the floor, his eyes moving between his two favorite humans with perfect contentment. The first treatment was scheduled for the following week. As they left the veterinary hospital, Chance walked between them, carrying his duck proudly despite the seriousness of the day's discussions. The early autumn air held a crispness that seemed to energize him, and his step was lighter than it had been in weeks. Coffee? Marcus suggested, pointing to a small cafe across the street from the hospital, one they had noticed on arrival for its "Dogs Welcome on Patio" sign. They settled at an outdoor table, Chance curling contentedly at their feet after receiving admiring pats from the waitress. For a few minutes they sipped their drinks in thoughtful silence, watching the flow of city life around them. So, Sophia finally said, regular trips to Chicago for the foreseeable future. Marcus nodded. I was thinking about that. The school board has offered me a curriculum development position for the rest of this semester, working remotely to redesign the science program while they have a substitute handling my classes. It would give me the flexibility for these appointments. That's perfect, Sophia said. And I've been offered a temporary position at Springfield Academy until Millfield High reopens, which could be another few months at least. Another silence fell, laden with unspoken questions about what would happen when temporary arrangements ended, when normal life resumed its demands. Dr. Patel mentioned stability, Marcus said cautiously, for Chance's sake. Sophia met his gaze steadily. For Chance's sake, she agreed, though something in her expression suggested she might be considering more than just the dog's welfare. Chance chose that moment to sit up, resting his chin on the table edge between them, his soulful eyes moving from one to the other with an almost human understanding. You know, Marcus said, a smile tugging at his lips despite the weight of the day. Sometimes I swear he's not just a dog. It's like he's orchestrating things, bringing people together. Sophia laughed, the sound bright in the autumn air. You mean our expert matchmaker here? She ruffled Chance's golden fur. Is that what you've been up to all along, buddy? Saving us both so we could save you? Chance's only answer was a soft woof, and that particular tilt of his head that always melted their hearts, but somehow it seemed answer enough. As the afternoon sun bathed them in gentle light, the three sat together in a moment of perfect harmony, a small family formed through storms and fire, bound by something more powerful than circumstance. Whatever the future held, whatever challenges Chance's condition might bring, they would meet them together. It wasn't the path any of them had anticipated, but looking at the contentment in Chance's eyes as he rested between the two people he loved most in the world, it was impossible to wish for any other. 2 years later, Chance lay sprawled on a checkered picnic blanket, his golden coat gleaming in the late spring sunshine. The park bustled with weekend activity, children laughing on the playground, joggers circling the perimeter path, other dogs frolicking in the designated off-leash area. But Chance was content to remain on the blanket, watchful and serene, his beloved duck nestled against his side. At nearly 4 years old, he was fully mature, his face showing touches of white that had appeared prematurely due to his condition. The experimental treatment had worked better than anyone had dared hope, stabilizing his heart function and allowing him a quality of life that had seemed impossible after his initial diagnosis. There were still bad days, moments of weakness, episodes of coughing that brought everything to a halt until they passed, but they were outnumbered by the good days, when his spirit shone as brightly as ever. "Hey, handsome," Sophia called, approaching with a small cooler in hand. "Ready for lunch?" Chance's tail thumped against the blanket, his eyes warming at the sight of her. Behind Sophia came Marcus, carrying a canvas bag filled with their picnic supplies. The years had changed him too. A few strands of silver now threaded through his dark hair, laugh lines more pronounced around his eyes. But the most noticeable change was in his demeanor. The guarded, somewhat withdrawn science teacher had been replaced by a man who smiled easily and greeted strangers without hesitation. "I think someone's getting hungry," Marcus observed, noting how Chance's eyes followed the cooler with keen interest. "But remember the rules, buddy. Picnic food is for humans. You've got your own special lunch." As if understanding perfectly, Chance sighed dramatically, eliciting laughs from both of them. The sound of their combined laughter, a harmony they had perfected over time, made his tail wag faster. They settled on the blanket, arranging their lunch with the practiced coordination of people who had shared countless meals together. From a separate container, Marcus produced Chance's special food, a precisely measured portion of the prescription diet that was part of his cardiac care regimen. "Good boy," Sophia praised as Chance waited patiently for permission before starting his meal. Such perfect manners. Those manners had been hard-won. After Chance's diagnosis, they had channeled his natural intelligence into training that would keep his mind engaged while respecting his physical limitations. He couldn't run for hours or compete in agility courses like other dogs his age, but he had mastered an impressive array of commands and tricks that required mental focus rather than physical exertion. "I saw Janet from the support group yesterday," Sophia mentioned, pouring iced tea from a thermos. "Baxter is doing really well on the new medication adjustment." The Canine Cardiac Support Group had been Sophia's idea, born from the isolation they'd initially felt navigating Chance's condition. What began as a few pet owners meeting in a library conference room had grown into a community of over 30 families, sharing resources, experiences, and emotional support. Chance, as the group's unofficial mascot, greeted each new member with gentle encouragement, as if welcoming them to a club nobody had chosen to join, but everyone was grateful to have found. "That's great news," Marcus replied. "Did she say if they're coming to the fundraiser next month?" The annual Hearts of Gold fundraiser for canine cardiac research, another of their initiatives, had raised over $50,000 the previous year. The event featured a short charity walk designed to accommodate dogs with heart conditions, followed by a silent auction and dinner. Chance always led the walk, setting a pace that even the weakest participants could manage, somehow understanding the importance of inclusion. "They're definitely coming. Baxter has a new bow tie picked out and everything." As they ate, they discussed the upcoming event, the end-of-year projects Marcus's students were preparing, and Sophia's plans for her summer school Spanish program. Their conversation flowed with the easy rhythm of people who had built a life together, not without challenges, but with a foundation strong enough to weather them. Their path to this point hadn't been straightforward. After that first experimental treatment, they had maintained separate residences in Springfield for several months, sharing Chance's care through a carefully orchestrated schedule. But as weeks became months, the artificial separation began to feel increasingly impractical. The solution had come unexpectedly, when a small house became available on the outskirts of Springfield. A charming cottage with a fenced yard, walking distance to the lake, and most importantly, a location that split the difference between their respective schools, making the commute manageable for both. We could co-own it, Sophia had suggested tentatively, for Chance's stability. For Chance, Marcus had agreed, though the way his eyes lingered on hers suggested he understood they were discussing something far more significant than real estate. Moving in together, for Chance's sake, had been their shared fiction. A comfortable way to take a leap neither was quite ready to acknowledge. But living together, sharing morning coffee, evening walks, midnight medication alarms, and the 1,000 small moments in between had gradually revealed what had been developing since that first stormy night. A deep, abiding love that had begun with a golden dog, but had grown to encompass each other. Their wedding, 6 months later, had been a simple affair in the backyard of their shared home. Chance had served as ring-bearer, proudly carrying a small velvet pillow with their bands attached by ribbon, his matching golden bow tie making him look distinguished despite the ever-present duck tucked securely in his mouth alongside the pillow. "I think he's getting tired," Sophia observed now, noticing Chance's eyelids drooping as they finished their lunch. "Should we head back?" Marcus checked his watch. "It's about time for his afternoon meds anyway." They packed up efficiently, with Chance helping in his own way by carrying his water bowl carefully back to the car. His medication schedule had become second nature to them all: morning pills hidden in a spoonful of peanut butter, afternoon injection that he accepted with stoic dignity, evening pills tucked into a small piece of cheese. The drive home was peaceful, Chance dozing in the back seat, exhausted but content after his outing. As they pulled into the driveway of their cottage, his head lifted, eyes brightening at the sight of home. Some things remained constant, regardless of his condition. Inside, after Chance had received his medication and settled onto his favorite spot on the couch, Marcus pulled Sophia gently into the kitchen out of the dog's earshot. "I heard from Dr. Patel this morning," he said quietly, "about the latest test results." Sophia's breath caught. They had been waiting for these results for days, trying not to worry when the call hadn't come as scheduled. "And the new measurements show the enlargement has stabilized. No advancement since the last scan." Marcus's voice wavered slightly. "She says it's the best possible outcome we could hope for at this stage." "Oh, thank God," Sophia whispered, tears springing to her eyes. She leaned into Marcus's embrace, relief washing through her like a physical sensation. When they returned to the living room, they found Chance watching them with that penetrating gaze that sometimes made them wonder just how much he understood about his own condition and their efforts to manage it. "Good news, buddy," Marcus told him, kneeling beside the couch. "You're doing great." Chance responded by licking his hand once, then settling his head on his paws with a contented sigh. Later that evening, as twilight painted the sky in watercolor hues, the three of them sat on the porch swing that had become their favorite spot for ending the day. Chance lay across their laps, his head on Marcus's thigh, his tail occasionally tapping against Sophia's leg as if keeping time with some internal rhythm. "Do you ever think about that night?" Sophia asked softly. "The storm, finding him in the ditch?" Marcus nodded, his hand automatically finding the spot behind Chance's ear that made the dog's eyes close in bliss. "All the time. How close I came to driving past. How different life would be." "He rescued us too, didn't he?" she murmured, "in his own way." "He brought us together," Marcus agreed. "Showed us what matters. Taught us how to love without reservation." He looked down at the sleeping dog who had changed everything. Pretty incredible for a half-drowned puppy in a ditch. Chance's ear twitched at the sound of his name, but he didn't wake. In his sleep, his paws moved slightly, perhaps chasing dream rabbits or revisiting the heroic dash through fire that had led them all to this moment. His heart, though damaged, beat steadily beneath Marcus's palm, a constant reminder of fragility and resilience, of love that transcended words, and of the extraordinary bond that had formed between a man, a dog, and the woman who had helped save them both. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the three remained together on the porch swing, a family created not by conventional means, but by something far more powerful. The incredible, transformative magic of rescue that worked in both directions, healing wounds both seen and unseen, and creating connections that defied explanation, but defined their lives.